This video is brought to you by the WCT Online Training Center. If you are looking for training, whether you are a homeowner, a business owner, or a professional, or even just interested in starting a career in the wildlife control training field, check us out online. We have free and paid classes that cover all aspects of the wildlife control industry, from understanding the basics of wildlife control all the way up to doing goose control or bat management procedures. You can find us online by going to wctmagazine.com and clicking on the online training tab. Okay, in this section, I want to talk about trapping and the different types of trapping that's out there. Trapping gets a very bad reputation, and a lot of it's just from misunderstanding. So what I want to do is I want to talk about the difference between fur trapping and wildlife or trapping for wildlife management. Another reason why I want to address this is we're about ready to cover regulations. And unfortunately, a lot of regulators view wildlife management the same way that they view a recreational activity called fur trapping. So let's go ahead and jump into it. When we talk about fur trapping, the first thing everybody needs to realize is that you're talking about an activity that is highly regulated. Now, I'm not getting into the politics here of whether or not you agree with it. I am just letting you know that fur trapping is a very highly regulated activity. It is a tool that a lot of regulatory agencies use for population management. If you think back to when I was talking about carrying capacity and I was talking about putting too much water into the glass and it was overflowing, or maybe that glass just keeps increasing. Well, the way that you manage the flow is by harvesting the extra animals. And this, like I said, is a wildlife management principle that a lot of regulatory agencies use. And one of those tools is fur trapping. Now, fur trapping, because you are dealing with a resource, which is the animal, the skins of the animals are processed, they are then sold, and they can be turned into garments. Again, I am not getting into the debate over whether or not you personally feel that this is okay. Everybody has a right to have their own beliefs with it. All I'm doing is discussing what fur trapping actually is. One of the main things that we need to look at with fur trapping, specifically when we're talking about regulations like we're about to, is that fur trapping is a recreational activity, meaning that there's no demand that the person go out there and do this. This is their choice. They are not trying to solve a problem, such as coyotes preying on goats or sheep. They're going out there because this is something that they enjoy. They like doing it. They like supporting outdoor conservation through their trapping activities. When we look at trapping for wildlife damage management, it really is very similar to fur trapping, but it has some main differences. One of the similarities is that, again, it is a very highly regulated activity. One of your differences, though, is that instead of being a recreational activity, a lot of times this is an activity that is being used for damage prevention or control. So we are purposely going out trying to take animals before they become a problem with other activities. Now, not always are these activities bad. Matter of fact, a lot of times they are very good activities. We have reintroduction programs that have used trapping successfully for wolves. And again, I'm not getting into the debate on whether or not you think reintroduction of wolves are good or bad. But we've also used trapping as a means to reintroduce elk herds. And yes, you can trap an elk, as well as much more small items such as river otters. We also go ahead and we use trapping for wildlife management for scientific research purposes, which all sound management needs to be based on science, not based upon personal belief or feeling. We also have disease monitoring, and a very good example of that is actually It's called the rabies border. And what that is the government actually has a trapping program because they put out over 1 million baits per year for raccoon rabies prevention. And so to see how effective those baits are, they need to go ahead, they need to catch a certain number of the population, take blood samples and test them to see, do those animals have the antivirus or the agent to prevent rabies inside of them that they would get from eating the food packet. And then, of course, the last thing once again for it, and this definitely gets back to our damage control part or damage management, which is the resolving human and wildlife conflicts. Now that we've talked about differences with one activity called trapping, even though it can be done for different things, let's now talk about the regulation side of it. How can we actually do what we're able to do? Who tells us what we're doing? And in this portion, we're really going to focus on the Ohio laws. Again, this is because I am based in Ohio. This is where my businesses are. I am very familiar with the Ohio laws, but I have also worked with other states in developing laws concerning wildlife management. So Ohio is a very good example of what's out there. And let me start this section by saying everybody has laws to follow, whether they are state laws, whether they are laws with your municipality. There's going to be some type of rule out there that says that you can or cannot do certain activities. So it's very important that you understand who's the regulatory authority where you're at and what rules you have for taking care of a problem yourself. So for instance, in Ohio, the Ohio Division of Wildlife is tasked with regulating trapping activities for recreational purposes as well as for damage control purposes. The laws that give them the authority to do that and the laws that must be followed are found in the Ohio Revised Code, which is the ORC 1531, and the Ohio Administrative Code, which is the OAC 1501. Again, additional rules and restrictions may be applicable at trapping locations based upon where you actually are performing services. So if we take a look at Ohio Administrative Code, section 1501:31-15-03, this is the general trapping regulations, and I believe it's the trapping hunting regulations. But section A, the general, number 1, it states, it shall be lawful for any person to trap or take live nuisance wild animals. It shall be unlawful for any person to trap or take nuisance wild animals except as provided in this rule. And I was mistaken. This is definitely the revised code specific to the our nuisance laws. Now, part of this is we have definitions, and these definitions are extremely important. What I just said is that we have a rule that says that we're allowed to take wild animals. Well, what exactly is a wild animal? Well, a wild animal includes mollusks, crustaceans, aquatic insects, fish, reptiles, amphibians, wild birds, wild quadrupeds, and all other wild mammals, but it does not include domestic deer, and that's very important to understand that. We also need to know what per Ohio law is a nuisance animal. Well, in Ohio Revised Code 1531.40, we've defined a nuisance animal as a nuisance wild animal means any wild animal that interferes with the use or enjoyment of property, is considered a threat to public safety, or may cause damage or harm to a structure, property, or person. Now, if you think back to when I covered the definition by Michael Conover, that's a very similar definition. So that's, again, things that you have to look for, because some states, they are very specific that a nuisance animal is only a nuisance when it is causing health issues or economic loss. And then you get into the debate of what exactly is economic loss. So again, before you do anything, you need to do your research, because what I'm referring to you, this is not just for professional wildlife operators. This is for the general public as well as professional operators. And every state is set up the same way in terms of the rules apply to everybody, and then there are some rules specifically for professionals. Now, what are some common nuisance species that we have here in Ohio? Well, we have bats, beaver, we have the common pigeon, European starling, and European house sparrow, chipmunks, coyote, fox, mice, mink, moles, and we have 3 different varieties of moles here. We have the eastern hairy tail and the star nose, muskrat, possum, raccoon, cottontail rabbits, rats, and we have roof rats and Norway rats, shrews, striped skunks, squirrels. Now for squirrels, again, we have multiple species. So we have fox squirrels, gray squirrels, red squirrels, southern flying squirrels, and northern flying squirrels. We have voles. Generally, those are going to be pine voles and meadow voles. We also have a woodchuck, which is also called a groundhog, and we have weasels. And there's the least weasel and the long-tailed weasel. So again, we've got multiple stuff going on. Now, those are all animals that anybody in the state of Ohio can work with without getting any type of special permission. Again, there are rules that have to be followed with it, but no special permission is required. If you're going to work with these following animals, you do have special requirements, and a homeowner may not be allowed to deal with it. So, what are some of these animals? Well, mainly we have the migratory birds. So we have Canada geese, crows, mute swans, songbirds, swallows, and woodpeckers. Some of these are protected in the state, or the state has special programs with, such as the mute swans. So even though they are not listed federally as a protected bird, in the state of Ohio, they really are a protected species. Canada geese are protected on the federal level, and so we have to do special things with the government in order to get the necessary permits to handle those. Same things with crows and woodpeckers. Then we get to things like white-tailed deer. Again, we have special regulations for how we can do that. Black bear. Well, black bear, not only do we have special regulations, but at the time of this filming, it doesn't matter if you are professional or if you are a member of the general public. We are not allowed to do anything in terms of capture with a black bear. The only thing that we can do is harassment, and that is it. And then we also have wild turkeys. Now, those are some of the animals that are covered either naturally or with a special permit. So what about animals that are not covered underneath these nuisance regulations? Well, we have non-native wildlife. So what's that going to be? Well, a lot of the pets that we get in the pet trade are going to be non-native wildlife. So if somebody comes in with a boa constrictor, doesn't matter what type, it's not native to the state of Ohio, and unless you live in the Everglades, it's not even native down there. That's all going to be non-native. So generally there's special rules that have to be followed with that, and that may or may not be part of the nuisance animal rules in your location. Then you have companion animals, and this is something very specific with Ohio, because a lot of places will talk about feral cats and dogs. Well, Ohio does not have feral cats and dogs. Matter of fact, according to Ohio Revised Code 959.131, a companion animal means any animal that is kept inside a residential dwelling and any dog or cat regardless of where it is kept. So if you have a potbelly pig that you keep inside of your house, that's going to be a companion animal per Ohio law. If you have a cat or dog, it doesn't matter if it's in your house or if it's out running the neighborhood. It is still a companion animal. It is not a wild animal. It's very important also to note that companion animals do not include livestock or any other wild animal. Okay, now who is allowed to perform control services or management services? Well, first off, in Ohio, if you're doing it professionally, you do have to be licensed to do it. There's an actual commercial nuisance wild animal control license, and you also have to receive certification for that in order to take effect. If you are the landowner, the spouse of the landowner, or their children, or tenants living in a structure, nothing is required, provided that you're working on the landowner's land or again, if you're a tenant on that property. If you are a landowner's agent and you're not charging a fee, you have to have a current hunting license and a fur taker permit. This is very important to understand because even if you don't hunt or trap, if you're going to be going through and taking care of a raccoon, because a raccoon is listed as a fur-bearing animal, even if you're charging no fee, you have to have a hunting license, which means that you had to have successfully taken and passed the Ohio Hunter Education course, as well as a trapping license. You just can't go out and do it because, well, your neighbor's having a problem, let me go over and do that. Again, most states have situations like this. We're talking specifically about Ohio, but you need to do your due diligence and research this yourself to find out what you can and cannot do. If you are an individual employed by a state, a county, or a municipal corporation who performs nuisance wild animal removal services or control services on land that is owned by the state, county, or municipal corporation, as applicable as part of the individual's employment, you don't have anything to worry about. That was a whole big thing basically stating that if you are a animal control officer in the state of Ohio and you are working on property that is owned by the municipality, not by the individual in their own residence, but by the municipality, you don't need any type of special licensing. And this is, again, why I said earlier that you have to be careful with the words, that the words really matter, because we have had issues where specifically animal control officers felt that they were allowed to go to private property because it was in their municipality and go ahead and remove a nuisance animal. And technically, by Ohio law, they would have to have a commercial nuisance wild animal license and certification to do so. So, what type of equipment can we use? Again, this is a regulation type thing. Just because you see something on YouTube, just because you think it's a great way to go ahead and do something, does not mean that it is legal to do. You need to do your due diligence. In most states, the equipment that you're able to use for a wildlife conflict are going to be cage traps, some type of foothold trap, something called an encapsulated foothold trap, which is also known as a species-specific trap, generally meant for raccoon, a body gripping trap, which is a trap that kills the animal in the capture process, or something called a snare. Those are basically the main types of traps that you're going to have. Now, almost all states have some type of identification that needs put on those traps. Again, this is regardless if you are a professional or if you are the homeowner. So if I have a cage trap and I am trapping on my own property, I still have to follow this rule. I have to have attached to that trap a waterproof tag written in English letters that is legible at all times. Generally, then you're going to have a couple things that you have to have on that tag. Some states give you an option between multiple conditions. Other states are very specific what's on there. So it might be a driver's license. It might be your name and your physical address. It might be a number that you have registered with the state that you're working in or that you're trying to control the animals in, so that you can put that number down and they can go ahead and say, okay, here's who really owns this. It's also important to note that some states, they say, okay, well, because of this species, this type of equipment does not require any type of identification. And we have that here in Ohio, for instance. And what we have is we have any equipment that is used for moles, shrews, voles, or house mice, Norway rats, or roof rats are not required to be marked. Now, once you have your equipment out there and you're going to try to catch the animal, it's very important that you monitor that equipment. Again, we are talking about regulations. Almost every state has something in there, whether it is a 24-hour trap check, whether it is an 8-hour trap check, whether it is 96 hours. A lot of it is based upon what type of trap you're using and where it is located. You're going to have to go ahead and research it yourself. There's no way that I can tell you for your specific situation because I don't know where you're at. If we're in Ohio, and again, This is what we're focusing on. This is pretty much a standard for most states. It's any equipment that you have set must be monitored at least once daily, and any animal that is captured must be removed. So if we are trying to catch a raccoon or a squirrel that's getting into our attic, we have to look at that trap on a daily basis. And if we have something in it, regardless if it is the animal that we intended for or not, we have to remove that animal. Again, there's exceptions to every rule. And one of the exceptions Ohio has, just like with identification, we have it in trap checking for the rats, mice, moles, shrews, and voles. You don't have to check those on a daily basis. Okay? The last thing to think about with this, and the last thing that they have really regulations on, is once you've caught the animal, what now? Well, you got to do something with it. And a lot of times, again, this is going to be determined by state law. Some states say that you have to release everything that you catch. Other states say that you have to put down everything that you catch. Some states say it's your decision, you caught it, but if you're going to release it, here's where it has to be released. Meaning it has to be X number of acres of property. It has to be in the county it was caught. Specific to Ohio, any beaver, coyote, fox, possum, raccoon, or skunk that is caught must be put down. Now, for beaver, the reason why we have this is that we no longer have any habitat in Ohio where we can move beaver to. Even though they create their own habitat, they're just too destructive. We have so many beaver that we cannot go ahead and move them all to these areas. So that's why we're putting those down. The other 5 animals, we put those down because those are called vector animals. We do have rabies in the state of Ohio. And in order to prevent the spread of rabies as well as other diseases, it is why, by law, we are mandated that we must destroy those animals. And this is very important to understand because a lot of people may not be capable of doing this. They may think that, well, I caught the raccoon, let me take it to the county park that's 2 miles down the road. Well, first off, if you don't go a certain distance, those animals are coming right back to you. That distance is based upon species. At this point, I really don't want to talk much about it. But the bigger concern is that you possibly could be taking a contaminated animal with a disease and introducing it into a disease-free area. And that's why it's important that we all follow these rules, regardless if we agree with them or not. So if you are not able to go ahead and put down these animals, I highly recommend hiring a professional or finding somebody who can put them down for you. Another thing we have here in Ohio is that squirrels, chipmunks, and woodchucks, it is our discretion. And again, this is professional as well as the homeowner. If you have a squirrel getting into your attic, you can catch it, you can move it to another location, and we'll talk about that rule here real soon, and you can let it go. You do not have to put it down. If you're a professional, you might need to because you can't move 4,000 squirrels in a year to the same location. You're just going to create problems with it. Nuisance animals that are to be released, again, looking at the squirrel that we just talked about, they must be let go outside the limits of any incorporated city or village. That means that you cannot go ahead and catch an animal at your house, go to the city park, and let it go. Instead, you need to take that animal, you need to take it to another location outside of the incorporated city or the village boundary lines. So generally, you're going to be going a good distance, 5+ miles in most cases, before you can release it. And lastly, before you can release that animal, you have to have written permission from the landowner in order to do so. So you just can't be driving down the road and go, there's a farm field, let me go ahead and let the animal go. Again, I cannot say this enough. This is all based upon the states. These were Ohio's laws. I know that there are other states where you are able to go ahead and release the animal on someone's property, whether they want it or not. So you're going to have to go ahead and research that. So that was a whole lot of background information that we just talked about. So let me go through some of the points that we discussed over this entire course, or rather video. We did an overview of certain wildlife principles and wildlife management with a focus in regard to carrying capacity. We talked about the difference between wildlife control and wildlife management. Control means that we have control over something. Management means that we're doing little things trying to get the result that we want. There's different wildlife management techniques, and I cannot stress this enough. Not every situation requires trapping. Matter of fact, I feel most situations do not require trapping. So you have habitat modification, harassment, you have the capture, and then you have prevention. We need to take a look at all of it so that not only are we dealing with this situation, but future situations. We need to remember that we need to identify what is the symptom and what's the problem to this conflict that we have. We need to think about how are we going to choose a technique. Is it cost effective? Is it legal? What's the result that's going to happen from it? We covered briefly the difference with the trapping, whether we're fur trapping or whether we're trapping for wildlife management. And lastly, we just went through a whole bunch of regulations. They were specific to the state of Ohio, but I guarantee you that regulations like this are in almost every single state out there. You need to find out who is your regulatory authority. Generally, it's going to be your Division of Natural Resources, the Divisions of Fisheries and Wildlife, or a Department of Wildlife, and ask them, okay, what do I need to do in this situation? And again, I can't stress this enough because there are states that actually, even though it's your own property, believe it or not, before you're able to do something, you actually have to have an agent come out and write you a permit authorizing you to do so on your own property. So make sure that you do your due diligence with it. And next time, what we'll be looking at is some of the equipment used for capturing conflict wildlife.